The exile comes to an end with the rise of Persia, the last of our three great Iron Age empires. The Babylonian Empire was a shooting star. It was very bright and very powerful and very brief, gone very, very quickly. In 539, Babylon surrendered to Cyrus the Great of Persia, which is in modern Iran if you're trying to locate that on a map. Cyrus had a different way of handling conquered peoples. You'll remember the Assyrians scattered the conquered peoples throughout their empire so they couldn't organize and rebel. The Babylonians exiled the leadership and made them live in Babylon, but kept them together so that they would be happier and less likely to rebel. The Persians said, well, if we just send the conquered peoples home, they'll be happy. And so they did. Cyrus the Great issued an edict, and the Edict of Cyrus allowed two things. Conquered peoples could return to their homelands, so the Jews could go home, and we could finally talk about Jews for the first time, as they were from the tribe of Judah, and the temple could be rebuilt in Jerusalem. For this, Cyrus is called Yahweh's Messiah, Yahweh's anointed. Isaiah 45 calls him the Messiah, the Christos in Greek. He is a Messiah. He's anointed by God for this. The Jews returned from Babylon to the land of Israel under the leadership of Zerubbabel, probably the second best name in the Old Testament, Zerubbabel. It's a good name. I had a colleague that wanted to name his son Zerubbabel. Thankfully, God blessed him with 4 daughters. He was going to call him Bubba. That was his plan. The majority of the Jews, however, remain in Babylon. But they did have a group that went home under Zerubbabel. And you don't endure something like exile and come back exactly the same. In fact, they were forever changed for the exilic experience. First of all, Israel was cured of its idolatry. There was a strict monotheism. All those concerns of the worshiping of idols is gone now with the exile. To prevent the exile from ever happening again, there was a strong emphasis on Torah. They wanted to know what it was God was asking them to do so they could make sure and never let this happen again. Well, when you're concerned about Torah, you need to know what is the Torah. And so Scripture becomes very important during the exile. That crisis really began the process of canonization. Remember, prior to the exile, Scripture was so unimportant that you could actually lose the book of Deuteronomy and forget where it was. We had that with the Josianic Reform, you'll recall. But now we want to know what it says. We got to get it together. Well, if you want to know what it says, you have to have copies of it. And so a new job comes on the line. The scribe, individuals who were experts in copying and transmitting the law. But the funny thing about that, if you were hand copying the Bible, you do that a few times, and I bet you become very good at knowing what's in there. And so these scribes very quickly go from being experts in just copying the text to experts in the text. The synagogue becomes the center of Jewish life. The general belief is this came out of the exile when you didn't have a temple, but you were trying to hold on to cultural identity. We might think of them somewhat anachronistically as sort of house churches, where they started by gathering together and reading some scripture and praying. The synagogue became the place where you could do anything you needed to do in spiritual life except sacrifice. The only place you could sacrifice would be in the temple. So we have some new jobs coming online. We have some old jobs disappearing. The king and the prophet begin to disappear following the exile. But because people are so concerned with being acceptable to God and following Torah, the priest becomes very important. And in fact, the high priest even more so. So important that it becomes a position of great political power as well as religious power. We do see coming out of the exile, Israel wrestling with its identity. So there are the tension between, are we going to be a separate holy priesthood and only associate with, marry with, live with, witness to, have relationship with other Jewish individuals? Or are we going to be more inclusive? Are we going to be a missional people? Are we going to open up to other cultures and other lands? And are we going to be an inclusive or universalistic kind of people? Or are we going to be that exclusivistic separatist people? And you see this tension work itself out in some of the literature itself. Ezra and Nehemiah tend to be very exclusivistic to the point of you send away your foreign wives. Nehemiah would beat you and pull your hair if you had foreign wives. And then you have Jonah and Ruth come along and show God's concern for even the Ninevites, the people who destroyed the northern kingdom. And a mixed marriage, a Moabite woman as a marriage, can actually produce David, the great King David. So maybe not all mixed marriages are a concern to worry about. But you don't come through an experience like the exile unchanged. And these are just some of the changes that we see in Israel's life.